Today's GovLove episode is brought to you by the Intersections in Public Service podcast. Produced by the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at the University of Virginia, the Intersections in Public Service podcast takes a look at the most pressing issues facing our community, how public servants of all kinds are trying to address them, and what you can do to help. If you love GovLove, then we think you'll also learn a lot from the Intersections in Public Service podcast. Episodes span current events such as the Afghan refugee crisis, and also discussions about bipartisanship with late Senator John Warner. To listen, you can search Intersections in Public Service in your favorite podcast app. You can also find out more by going to coopercenter.org. That's coopercenter.org to find out more.
I'm just a facilitator. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this session of GovLove. It's a podcast, so you might be wondering, why am I here? How is this a podcast? So right now we're actually recording. To give you a little bit more understanding what ELGL is, we like to call ourselves an accidental professional organization that started off in 2012 in somebody's house. But our mission is to engage the brightest minds in local government. And one of the ways that we like to do that is with a podcast called GovLove. And today we will be talking about the Great Resignation, and I have an awesome set of panelists here today for y'all to listen to talk about that. And so I will introduce them to you. Let's start with Melody. So Melody Lennox is the Senior Vice President of People Operations at Axxess, the fastest growing home healthcare technology company in North America. She is responsible for advancing global growth strategies, improving operational excellence, facilities management, procurement, global human resources strategy, and leading organizational change, leadership development, and talent acquisition and diversity. Melody joined Axxess in 2012, where she has been instrumental in helping the organization grow and scale into a global organization. Melody has a proven track record of working closely with business leaders at all levels, has worked in entrepreneurial mid-sized and Fortune 500 firms in healthcare, manufacturing, retail distribution, state and municipal government, and higher education. She has been recognized with numerous awards, including Top 100 Global HR Professional Icon, Leadership Excellence and Development, Top Corporate National Leader, National Women's Council Top 15 Businesswoman, and Dallas Business Journal Minority Business Leader. Melody has been featured in various media outlets, including Forbes, and is a member of the Forbes HR Council. Melody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We also have Ronnie Dampier. Ronnie is the Chief of Staff of the District Department of Transportation. Before joining DDOT, Ronnie served as Chief of Staff for the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure, an office created by Mayor Bowser in January 2019. In this role, he oversaw operations, policy, legislation, budget, and communications for 7 district agencies. Ronnie started his D.C. government career with the Department of Motor Vehicles Adjudication Services, where he served as hearing support manager and management analyst. Ronnie also served as a member of the Traffic Adjudication Appeals Board, and then he transitioned to the Office of the City Administrator as Senior Operations Analyst. He holds a Master's of Science in Project Management from George Washington University and a Bachelor of Science in Hospitality Management from Tuskegee University. Ronnie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. And last but not least, we have Margarita Hudgins. So Margarita has been in the insurance industry for 30 years. She spent 23 years with USAA in Norfolk, Virginia, and San Antonio, Texas, prior to joining Colonial Life in Columbia, South Carolina, as Assistant Vice President of Account Management. She is currently National Public Sector Practice Leader responsible for the Pacific and Midwest region's public sector market development. Margarita has a Bachelor's of Science from Old Dominion University, Norfolk, Virginia, a Master of Science from Salve Regina University, Newport, Rhode Island, and a Doctor of Philosophy from Hampton University. Margarita, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So we've got a great set of panels for you today. We're going to talk about the Great Resignation. Okay, but before we do that, something that we always do on the GovLove podcast is we have a lightning round. So this is an opportunity for me to ask a quick set of questions to our panelists so you can get to know them a little bit better before we go into the actual questions at hand. So I have 3 lightning round questions for y'all today. Are you ready for them?
We're ready.
Let's go.
Okay, great. So first question, we ask every host this question. What is your most controversial, non-political opinion? All right, you ready? So who wants to start? I'll do this melody.
Mayonnaise and ketchup should never be on anything.
Well, on anything?
Anything.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Okay. All right. Okay. That is controversial. Thank you. Ronnie, what you got?
Chicago pizza is better than New York.
Oh.
It is what it is. It is what it is.
Ronnie, where are you from?
Chicago.
Okay. All right, I just want to highlight some bias there. That's all.
I mean, you know.
Okay, thank you for that first round of questions. All right, second question for you. Funniest thing you did as a kid that your parents still talk about today now that you're an adult?
Oh, God.
You want to do the same order?
Okay.
Yeah.
I told my 10th grade health teacher that she didn't know how to do her job. She gave me an F for an essay report because, to give you context, the essay report was on finding health articles to write about. And in my household, we had Ebony and Jet magazines. And so she told me those were not credible resources. So she gave me an F. And I said, you don't know how to do your job? I called my mom. She brought a case of Ebony and Jet magazines and told her to read those, schedule a meeting. She apologized, cried to the class, and I passed.
There you go. That's how you do it. Look at you now.
Look at me now.
Wow.
I like it.
I think I definitely challenge people, but the funniest thing my grandmother always talks about is that I would go into the kitchen late at night and sneak food.
Yeah.
And I still do that. So.
Yeah. I mean,
In my own house.
Yeah.
You know,
It takes a while to get through that
is.
deep dish pizza.
Yeah, this is very true. It's very true.
Okay, and so for me, apparently my 2-year-old enunciation of James Brown's rendition of "I'm Black and I'm Proud."
All right. I like it. All right.
Not sure how I said it, but
It was fine. All right. Okay, so last lightning round question for each of you. Okay, so the best advice that you've ever received?
Failure is not a person, it's an action. Don't let it take over your day. Keep moving.
I like it. That's great.
Yeah, it's similar. My grandmother would always say, just don't be upset at failure. It's a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
there's no such thing as luck. It's when preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's some great advice for all three of y'all. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about the Great Resignation. So I did a little bit of research before we got here, and I have some really interesting things that I think could really highlight and set the context for our discussion. But first, I think it would be great to hear from y'all, the audience, about your general thoughts about the Great Resignation. So we have a poll everywhere question for y'all. Is what does the Great Resignation mean to you in one word? All right, so let's see. We've got some things already populating. Okay, opportunity. So the bigger the word is in the word cloud, that's the word that is used more for all of you. So we've got opportunity, change, new beginnings, toxicity, redesign, frustration, reset. Yeah, these are really good words.
Yeah.
The biggest ones being change and opportunity. Yeah, so as y'all feel free to continue to put your responses in there, but as you're populating those, I just want to bring up some interesting statistics about the Great Resignation. So it's a term that we're all familiar with to describe the unprecedented 47 million Americans who voluntarily quit their jobs in 2021 in the midst of a global pandemic. It has sent shockwaves through every labor industry and has caused critical worker shortages in hospitality, food service, retail, transportation, medicine, and government. And so far in 2022, the worker crisis seems to be continuing. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in November of 2021, we saw a record 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs. Just last month in February, we saw 4.4 million people quit their jobs. In December of last year, we saw a record 11.4 million available positions in the country. And just last month, that number was still high at 11.3 million positions, so that need to be filled. So for every job-seeking American, the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that there are just below 1.8 jobs available. so not a lot of options for people. With the Great Resignation, it's been a term to describe a lot of things that are going on, and the reality is that this has been part of a longer-term trend. So since 2009, the average monthly quit rate has increased each year, suggesting that what we have seen the last 2 years may not be unique, but a magnifying glass on a longer-term trend that's going to continue for years to come. So people are also calling this topic the Great Retirement, the Great Reimagination, the Great Reset, the Great Realization. So these are all terms to generally say that people are fed up with their jobs, they're re-examining the role of work in their lives, and have been introduced to alternative work models and are pursuing different careers that align with their passions and their values. The workers who have stayed in their jobs and taking on an increased work burden are struggling to get work done, feel more disloyal to their employers, and are more dissatisfied with their jobs that may contribute to the trend of 4 million Americans quitting their jobs every month since January 2021. And so that leaves the question, what do employers ultimately need to do? And so the question that I have for the panelists is, so what have been your experiences and your roles and initial observations with the Great Resignation? And I'll start with Ronnie.
Yeah, absolutely. Whew. So I think for us, the district government and the core agencies that I had at the time were all operational agencies. So they could not stop their job
Right.
at the beginning of the pandemic. So we're talking about public works, transportation, consumer regulatory affairs. Things were still moving. And the burnout that came from that immediately was a total shock to the system. What it then led to was, as you read, people started to identify and really come to the realization that they didn't need to be involved in that environment. And I think that a lot of leaders, a lot of organizations drive their organization as if you need to be here.
Right.
You have to be here. And some of our folks who, collect your trash, process your permits, they were saying that there are other things that I can do and I can quickly get into where I can use my skills. And so we saw kind of like this mass exodus. Then it turned into, what is the opportunity here? How do we retain folks? How do we make this the business that they want to stay in? But then the trouble was, those folks did not qualify for telework. Right. And telework is the biggest part of this conversation now as we look at Great Resignation. And we are trying to identify, or I'll say to your question, we're trying to identify the value for people to stay in the organization. And I think as I talk to other government peers, it's the same thing. And so I don't think we can continue to recruit the same way, train the same way, operate the same way. And when I say operate, it means, what's the business practice? Yeah. What policies do we have? What's the processes that we have in place? So it has led us to totally uproot the entire organization, from leadership to the front line, again, to legislation, right? The regulations that we have to operate by. Like, you just can't go make a quick, easy decision. Right. It's the law. And that process in itself can be cumbersome. So yeah, I mean, it's been, flipping the pancake basically and looking at the little bubbles come up, and so we're waiting on those bubbles to come up, so when it's time to flip it back over and say you got the complete package.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that you said that I thought was interesting in the context of government is government often has such a diverse array of different work jobs, work experiences, work styles, and the burden that was placed on the people who had to be out in the field. And so one of the things is, hey, why do they get to work from home and I still have to show up every day
exactly.
and put myself in harm's way? And so that's definitely a unique challenge. So thank you for sharing that. Melody, what have been your experiences with the Great Resignation so far?
So one of the things that we've seen, we're a technology company, so in the healthcare technology space, and we thrive on being innovative and really looking overall at how we can shore up the organization. And the start of the pandemic, because of being intentional about our technology, our processes, we were able to transition within 24 hours to a 100% remote organization.
Wow.
And we did not miss a beat. There was no impact to our clients. We were able to set up our employees and provide training and resources to help them get established at home, because we did, even though we're a technology company, you still have a lot of people that have never worked remote or teleworked. And so it was helping them understand how to engage and how to keep our culture intact with everyone now being 100% virtual. And so we partnered with organizations to ensure that our people could now understand how to integrate work and life, because at that point it's no balance.
Right.
So it's how do you integrate it, how to step away, how do you take time for whether it's doctor's appointments or caring for your family. And so what we saw, that high stress, was a lot of people became caregivers.
Yep.
They became educators.
Yep.
So it's saying, okay, what can we do to help provide the tools and resources? So then we partnered with organizations to provide training, to provide resources, to help our people understand how to now create that mental space to be able to handle it. COVID took a huge hit from a mental perspective for people because it became total isolation.
Yeah.
And so some of our people dealt with that challenge because they thrive on being around people. And so it's helping them understand how to engage virtually so that you still get that component, but also how do you now transition? So we had to teach a new skill set.
Yeah.
For our people. As a result of us continuing to do that, we grew through the pandemic. So we expanded globally to 3 different countries in the midst of the pandemic, and we're still 100% remote.
Wow.
And we're still continuing to grow. But what we have also identified is a lot of organizations, government, healthcare as well. A lot of organizations struggled with that. So we have in turn start partnering with them to train them on how we leverage technology to now create the type of workforce that you need to sustain it.
Yeah, absolutely. A question that I have for you is, what was your organization, did your organization have any experience with remote or hybrid before the pandemic started? I think one of the things that we've seen is that organizations that have been having alternative work styles before the pandemic were easier transitioning into the pandemic to make their workforce more remote. So did your organization have hybrid and remote work schedules before the pandemic started?
So we had about 10% of our workforce was remote, but our corporate office in Dallas, everyone, so you had everyone in the office. So just 10% of the people in the U.S. were remote. And so it's leveraging on them to say, okay, now you get to experience what we're experiencing from a remote perspective. But also our people had the opportunity to experience what our clients are experiencing in terms of how we support. So we were able to not only train our people, but it benefited our clients and potential clients because they saw that we now understand at a deeper level how to support you, and we provided that training to our clients.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Margarita, what has been your experience with the Great Resignation?
Well, in terms of our organization, very much like Melody, we pivoted easily. We had remote workers. We have a workforce. Actually, our facility in Columbia, South Carolina, only house about 75% of the employees. So there are a group of employees that are considered permanent, and it's probably 50. They have desk, 50%, right. And then there's another percentage that it's you come in and you sit wherever. So it was really that model that allowed us to really pivot. Now, our business model is a little different in that we are an insurance company and we have our clients, where our clients consists of public sector. So any, commercial as well as public sector, but specifically public sector. And one of the things that we experience is that they are not necessarily into technology. So when it came to employee benefits and things of that nature, because again, they're still working, right? They don't have that option. We were able to actually help those entities that were working with us to transition from a more manual paper to a digital process. So I think there were benefits from that standpoint as it relates to Colonial. But in terms of our company, certainly there were the same challenges. There were some folks who prefer to be in the office, and those folks were, their isolation issues. But again, our organization, they responded by providing resources, mental health, even just, because you have to think about holistic wellness, right? Because it's not always just about the mental health. There's the physical. People need to, get out. They need to work out, and maybe just walking in the building is their exercise. So that's limited now that they're in their homes. But you also have financial. That's a component, because again, there could be additional financial constraints because you have to maybe have childcare that you didn't have because you have kids that aren't in school anymore and now they're at home, but you have to work, so therefore you have to have someone to take care of them. So really and truly, they tried to make sure that they had a full suite of resources available. And in addition, these were things that the organization tried to really leverage with the clients as well. One of the things that our company did, and I was really proud of that, there were a lot of challenges with small businesses. And so some of those small businesses are our clients. And then we also have public sector entities that are working. So, and we have 48 offices across the country. So each of those managers were tasked with identifying a customer that was a small business, providing food to be delivered to a public sector entity who was also a customer. So it's just, it really is trying to look at the larger picture of what's happening and trying to make sure that we were giving back. So it's not just about, what can we gain as an organization. But there were just a lot of challenges, and as an organization, because we were able to pivot, we were trying to ensure that our clients actually had the opportunity to continue to move forward and take some things off of their plate, as it relates to just the enrollment process, if you will.
Absolutely.
So,
that makes a lot of sense. So we already, have to understand that this has impacted a lot of people across the country. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was try to get a sense of how has the Great Resignation impacted the people that are in this room. So going back to that poll everywhere question, the question I have for the audience is, have you quit, retired, or resigned from a job since the pandemic started? Okay, so we have about the vast majority of people saying no, that they have not quit, retired, or resigned from a job since 2021. 20% saying yes, they have. 18% saying no, that they're thinking about it. 5% saying no, they're retiring soon. So still a very good proportion of people in this room have been impacted by the Great Resignation in some way, shape, or form, and been a participant. So the next question that I have is, so this is your own personal experience, but do you know of someone who has quit, retired, or resigned from a job since the pandemic started? Right, so I would imagine the vast majority of people here are going to be the answer is yes. So this has impacted somebody in some way, shape, or form since the pandemic started, in the same way that the actual impacts of COVID itself we probably all know somebody who has either gotten COVID or have died from COVID. So the vast majority of people, they know somebody, have been impacted by somebody who has been a part of the Great Resignation. So the next question that I have is, Ronnie, to you, is what have been the particular challenges of government of people leaving their jobs?
I think the number one challenge is succession planning. We have a tremendous amount of subject matter experts who are part of Great Resignation or the Great Retirement, and we have depended on them to run the public sector. And now there's that opportunity piece when we did the word cloud, where we have the chance to implement some new processes, new procedure, a new way of doing things. But the systems of government could take a toll on a person, let me say that. Because there are so many hidden pieces to what we do. And it's not just about knowing how to get something done, but it's sometimes it is knowing the right people. It's the relationships. And I think that over the last 2 or 3 years, the folks that have left, particularly like my agencies in DC government, they left and they took their relationships with them.
Yeah.
And nobody's been able to build that back up. And then there's also, I think, the fight of trying to get people to understand that your cities are just not the same.
Yeah.
Our residents are not the same. We always have this fight about the different generations and what they want, and buy a house or rent or drive or take the metro. And you have folks, again, in the government who are just like, well, no, it's always been this way. We've always implemented bike lanes the same way. We've always paved the streets and done it the same way. We've always done 311 the same way, right? And that mindset has really, I think, caused a rift when it comes to the younger generation, of course, in the workplace. But when we're in that position of trying to implement something new, the turnover is constant. And so we're always back at square one.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to dig all of this old knowledge up, implement it, and get it, intertwined into the new process. But then, every 2 months, sometimes, literally, every 2 months, new analysts are starting. And I have to start all the way back over. Or chiefs are starting back over. Directors are starting back over. And so we haven't been able to really get a groove at this point. I think it's coming. But, at the end of the day, I think the worst thing we do, governments across the nation, we fail to plan when it comes to succession and progression and retirement. Like, we fail to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate statement. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm in the Triangle area, so there are a lot of local governments in a very small region, is that it's easier just to poach somebody from the next government over than to try to hire somebody and train them up and try to establish them long-term for that succession plan. It's like, let me just go over there, I'll hire you, like, hey, come over. Great, I don't have to worry about this. You have all the skills you need. But you're still at a deficit, right? And so ultimately for the residents who live in that area, you're still losing out because there's somebody at that other position that just that's not there anymore that you have to fill. Melody and Margarita, I want to ask you about, succession planning in your respective organization, the private sector, and how y'all have kind of done that as people have maybe left, or have you trained people to be prepared for the positions that you have?
Absolutely. How we see succession planning at Axxess, we start from day one. And we have a policy, a requirement. You always copy someone on the email. You never send the email to one person and there's no one else copied. You always carry someone along. When you go to a meeting, never go to a meeting by yourself. You always take someone to a meeting. So we start from the beginning, from soon as you join. In fact, in the interview process, it's a panel interview of cross-functional leaders when you interview. And so everything that we do, we keep that in mind. So we're educating them on how we do business, you're coming with your own set of skills, but we want to teach you how we do business. We want you to master our solutions, and then we want to then merge that so that you can then be successful. And whether that's in one area, it could be HR, it could be operations, it could be customer service. No matter where you are, you're going to learn what's going on across the organization, and that allows us then to move talent however we need it. And so we're able, for example, with myself, I have an HR background. So I came in to the organization in HR. I've done marketing. I've done client experience, our customer service. I've done our billing services, account management, sales. I've done everything except for engineering. They won't let me code. But and operations. And so understanding that, it allows me then to plug and play wherever is needed at any given point. And that's an example for all of our people. So internally, that's how we move talent around, and you can see the opportunities. But externally, we have to educate people, because people tend to think knowledge, they say knowledge is power. Well, it's really what you do with the knowledge.
Right.
Right? And so we're teaching them to leverage the knowledge, to share the knowledge, so that you are not the only person that knows how to do it and that knows what to do. So we don't run into those situations where you're losing the relationships, you're losing this is the only person in the entire organization that knows how to do one thing. Right. And then that is going to have detrimental implications, to our people, to our organization, to our clients. So we're very intentional about that from day one. And that's how we approach it. But we also have to teach it, because everyone does not approach it that way. And so when we think about our clients are experiencing that. Our clients are home health agencies, hospice, care in the home. So we provide the technology for them to run their business end to end. Well, when they lose their director of nursing, or when they lose their compliance officer, they don't know what to do. Well, we're teaching them how to collaborate and how to train up so that they can continue to grow and they can build that pipeline. And so that, that starts day one. And that's a cultural shift. That's a mind shift that your leaders have to have, because now your leaders have to be the ambassadors to promote that and to foster that collaborative environment.
Wow. I'm definitely going to take some of these lessons back with me. Margarita, being what is succession planning and continuity of operations looks like from your industry?
Yeah, well, it's critical in our industry, and I don't think that we're as progressive as you guys are in terms of succession planning, but at the executive level, it is much more prevalent. And so there are exercises that happen behind the scenes as it relates to executive movement, and that happens quite frequently, because the reality is, if you're at that level, you're a leader, and it's not necessarily a technical knowledge that you have to have. You just have to know how to lead people. Now, our organization, we do have opportunities to try to develop people. So there are lots of programs that we have to help people move from an operational type job to a management job, because a large number of folks have been in operational roles for a number of years, and they may not necessarily transition to a manager role because they don't have management experience. So it's like, are you saying I need to leave and then come back? So they have programs established which focus specifically on minorities and women. And so those programs are there to help people move across or move up in the organization, because really you want to have a pipeline of people who understand the business, who have a level of loyalty to the organization as well. And if they've been there for that long, then I think it's critical to ensure that the loyalty is sort of appreciated and it's shown by giving them an opportunity to move up. But it absolutely, we've had a huge amount of leadership change in our organization over the last 6 weeks. No, it's been a huge amount. And within that change, and this is at the highest level of our sales organization, we've had 4 people out of 5, right, that left the organization for various reasons. And they were replaced with folks from within the organization. And now the one person that was remaining has recently left, and that will be backfilled, and likely internally. Certainly it can be external, because the reality is you want to have a diverse group of folks. And I always say diversity is not about race or gender. It really is, ensuring that you have a diverse group of thinking. And I'll just provide an example. I relocated to Columbia, South Carolina from San Antonio, Texas, by way of Virginia. And, certainly inside the building of Colonial Life in Columbia, there were a diverse group of people in terms of race and gender. But my God, 90% of the people went to the University of South Carolina.
Go Gamecocks.
So there's groupthink to some degree, So, but there definitely has been a shift in that perspective as well, as they're starting to bring in folks from other organizations, from other universities as well. So I think it's critical to definitely have some type of succession plan, because there is a generational gap that's being created by all the baby boomers that are retiring, and then the millennials, for example, who are choosing maybe not to go into public sector,
right.
Which has been an interesting thing as I think about that, because with millennials not necessarily going into public sector for a lot of different reasons. I think challenges with technology, and then also you have just the bureaucracy associated with that, right? But the motivation for millennials in terms of their career and what they want to do in life tend to be about, having a mission. Like there has to be a purpose. And if you think about public sector, it's about service. So you would think that those two things would align, and that's where they would want to be. So I think there's some things that the public sector can do to really help close that gap. And so I think we're probably going to talk about some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I did want to ask you, because you helped co-write a white paper on, the Great Resignation, and particularly the Silver Tsunami. So what were some of the findings that you had when you did the research for that white paper?
Okay, so I'm not going to take credit for that white paper. I was actually the person distributing it. Okay. But it was within our organization, our resource center completed the Great Resignation. And we also partner with research institutes. So Mission Square Research Institute, we partner with them, and Orlando had a lot of the bullet points that I noted as well in terms of what was happening. But just to deep dive a little bit into that particular research study, folks were leaving because they were burned out. That's a huge part. But the interesting thing that I thought is the job change piece. Actually, education was the largest percentage of the reasons that people, or in that industry, and they were folks that were 40 plus years of age, and mostly African Americans that were leaving the educator K through 12 market. So, I mean, it makes sense in a lot of ways, because I think teachers were now remote teachers, and that was very difficult for them. So they're dealing with maybe their kids as well as the kids online. I had a neighbor telling me that she hired a babysitter to take care of her kids so that she could teach her class. And during this time, I became grandma teacher. So that's what my grandson was calling me, because I was, sort of his teacher during this period of time. And then, additionally, in terms of retirement, you have folks retiring. Really was the 60 plus who had an average income, or a household income, I should say, of 100,000 plus. So those were the largest percentage of people leaving jobs or retiring to do things that they just wanted to do. So I think that it really was a large. I think people really just reassessed their priorities during this time. I mean, Orlando mentioned it, during that 2-year period. People had a lot of time to kind of think about things and what's important, and lots of folks had a lot of loss, and so that just created that awareness. And maybe it wasn't the 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 in some cases, or whatever it might be. So I think it was just critical for people to kind of reassess, and that created a lot of the change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about burnout. Going to another poll question. So for those in the audience, have you felt more stressed or burned out since the pandemic started in your personal jobs? I love the immediate 100% yes. So yeah, it seems like the vast majority of people are definitely feeling.
A little nudge, though.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say pandemic/Trump.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I think some of the political things that have happened ever since the Trump presidency and where we are now has been a lot of political divisiveness that has definitely added to stress, especially for public sector employees and more people, contacting public sector servants and having to deal with residents. So definitely, I think that's definitely contributed to a lot of burned out and stress as well as in addition to the pandemic. So.
Yeah, I'll just kind of jump in. In terms of our organization, one of the things that and they've really just put it on the forefront. Our CEO is a 50-plus white male, and he really just he created these CEO calls. So he had all the employees in the organization on the calls, and he really just talked about what was happening. Again, provided resources for people, counseling, so that people would have an outlet other than a company resource. So there were third-party, folks that were helping to facilitate this. And I think it's just really critical that, organizations, leaders, really just step out there and realize that everyone is really going to be dealing with this in a different way. And they definitely have to just provide some type of outlet for folks to have those conversations. Additionally, maybe some folks don't want to talk, but then you have to have some type of maybe attendance policies that are modified, or there's not this micromanaging, right, of employees when it comes to how they're going about their day-to-day. And sometimes I think that can happen. And people, not everyone is going to talk about what they're going through. But I think we have to be proactive as leaders to identify what the needs are and this just really put things out there. That's just kind of my take on it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I'll also share. So for our organization, our CEO is he's Nigerian, but a black man. Early 40s. So young black man. During the time, George Floyd, all of this. So during this time, he was also the chairman of the Dallas Regional Chamber at this time. And when that happened, so as all the racial tension, right, continued to rise, he stepped out in front of it. And as an organization, we have monthly town halls, but addressed that and created a safe space to talk about it and for us to share personal experiences and really talk about, how we were feeling. In addition to that, worked with the chamber, the business community to talk about what things we can do. So racial profile and racial discussions, and really bring that to the table and force the conversation. So those crucial conversations were taking place publicly. And that takes courage, because that's some backlashes that you can experience as an organization. And so that's something that we provided resources for our people. We provided time off. To encourage time off, to encourage our leaders on what tools and resources to educate themselves. We can do, we can provide education, but it's also a requirement for them to educate themselves. I shouldn't have to tell you everything I'm going through. You can do the research too. And so we challenged our people to also learn, and we this was ongoing through the pandemic, and through that to talk about how are we feeling and make sure, because they bring that into the workforce. So how do you then lead, and what can we do to help mitigate that? How can we impact and affect change? And so that's something that we've done, leading from the front, to really be an advocate and a champion to make sure that the black voice is heard, that black and brown issues are at the table. And it starts again when it affects the money. When it affects the money, people start paying attention.
Right.
And so talking about the impact that has on the bottom line of your organization, then leaders started coming to the table to say, okay, we're listening. What can we do? And that's something that that our leader has done. That's something that I personally do, but that we do as an organization to get involved and partner to make sure that it's not just a conversation, but that we have action attached to that.
Yeah. We're about to go into Q&A. I just have one more question for the panelists. Let's talk about looking ahead a little bit. So what does work need to look like, 3-5 years from now to make organizations attractive places of work for new people coming into the organization, but also for the people that are currently there to help combat some of these feelings of burnout and maybe thinking about leaving?
So it's culture.
Yep.
It starts at every level, but at the leadership level, there's a culture shift that needs to take place. If you don't foster the right environment,
Right.
you're not going to keep talented, non-talented, any type of individual. And understand, government has a perception that people go there to retire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we all know people retire in their jobs long before they retire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? So when you have that mentality, as you continue to hire, all you're doing is just, like you said, you go to this agency and pull this one, this agency and pull this one. Well, that shift requires you to make some hard decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So making that culture shift and being intentional about the type of culture that you want, that is how you can pivot and shift and continue to be sustainable and relevant 10 years from now. Because if you set the right culture, it will, there's a book that says Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast.
Yeah.
When you set the right culture, it will drive out those impurities.
Yeah.
And so you have to be committed to it, because sometimes, you're like, oh, this is a really good person. But that really good person is lazy. That really good person is toxic. That really good person, well, you can be friends with them on the outside, but it's affecting your business. Mm-hmm. It's not allowing you to shift and change. When you get your culture right, then everything else will start to align. Technology, looking at how you can advance policies, all those things. But it starts with culture first.
Yeah. Thank you. Ronnie?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the time that we're taking now is to really evaluate what brings people to work, what makes them want to stay. I personally pull my teams, I'll schedule a meeting, and sometimes it's like check in with the chief of staff. And so everybody comes with their papers and they're ready, like, what does he want to know? And I said, well, just talk to me. What's going on? What's happening in your world? How are you feeling? What do you need from me? What do you need from the director? What do you need from the deputy mayor and the mayor?
Yeah.
What is it that you want to see to keep you here, to do the good work? And I think, connecting and having meaning, because I am the millennial and I want my work to be meaningful. I want purpose going to work. And yes, for me, it is that connection. Like public service is meaningful to me. But if we don't ask the right questions, if we don't assess, but then actually do the change, because that's the thing. I think, folks who are public administrators, like, we do all this in community engagement, and we ask the neighbors what they want, we ask everybody what they want to see, and then they're like, well, all of the things that we said we want is just sitting on the shelf.
Yeah.
And so, the public piece is they've lost faith in government. And then you have employees who are saying, well, yeah, you made us do all of this work and it's sitting on, they've lost faith. So, one, conversation, yes. 2, action. And I think that to Melody's point, I think the quickest way to put it is managing performance is key. Because we can't talk about these big, lofty goals and not have metrics to go along with them, and have something to point back to, and show people that their work is meaningful,
right,
and that we actually want you to be here because we are doing these things. But government culture can be very tricky, and to be very transparent. As you talked about earlier, I worked for Marriott International. I was a hotels guy. I just thought that was going to be it. And so I called my grandmother one day. I said, Grandma, I got a job with the government. First thing my grandmother said is, don't go. And my grandmother retired in Chicago from government. She was a manager. She did public aid in Chicago. And she said, Ronnie, it will wear you out because people don't want to change. They want to do the same thing. They want to fight you all day. And so my grandmother does check-ins on me, right? And I check in on myself. But my grandmother calls random, baby, how you doing?
Yeah.
And it is very important.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that a lot of senior officials, I'll say, have that mindset because let's just face it, a lot of our work is what the elected officials have said we need to do. And that's not just the mayor, it's the council, as well, right? But then you have the constituents who are totally sometimes able to uproot your entire organization because of what they want. And I'm not fussing, like just being real, that it's hard to maintain sometimes. And, if you have a culture of success, and one of those points of success being performance, having strong processes, strong project management, right? That even when this random request comes in, you can tell them it'll be 130 days before we get to that because that is how we do it.
Right.
That's the business we do. But if you're saying, oh yeah, okay, you yelled at me, we're gonna do it. So now let's stop this full project over here to go meet the needs of this one person that yelled the loudest. Not that they needed it,
right?
But yelled the loudest. Like, what do you expect your employees to do? Because they're just in this place of just, I'll just sit back.
Yeah.
I'll sit back and I will wait.
Right.
Until the next emergency happens, and we'll put that fire out.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Thank you for that. Margarita, you have the last thought before we go to Q&A.
Okay, so just real quick, I want to note that culture is critical, but you have to also have the infrastructure, right? So technology transformation is critical. In public sector, there's certainly budgetary constraints that impede the ability to move forward. I think there's an opportunity to look at process improvement. And a lot of times, and you guys sort of hinted to this, you have people in place that will impede that process because it's job security if they just know it and they're just doing it. And as an organization, we run into that when we're dealing with public sector entities. You have a particular person who's responsible for benefits, and they don't necessarily want any type of digitization. They just want paper. They want to do it. They want all of that. So, trying to find process improvements or really partnering with vendors to provide services to you as a public sector entity, it exists. They want to work with the public sector, and they are willing to provide services. You just have to ask and also be on the lookout for them. If you have a gatekeeper, the gatekeeper could be the person that's keeping the information from you, just to note there. And really and truly the employee experience. Like, that's important to understand what the employee is going through. You have, a lot of times as we're thinking about trying to acquire new employees, there's a huge focus on what are we going to do for the new people? It's just kind of like getting a new cell phone and they're getting all the good stuff. And it's the same type of thing. What are you doing for the existing employees to ensure that you're retaining them? And I'll just give a real quick example. The state of Connecticut went through this process, and one of the things that they looked at, they identified that the folks who were part of the union were making more money than some of the managers and executives for the state. And so they literally created a state policy where anytime there was an increase for the union during the bargaining process, they would also increase those managers and executives, because you want those folks who are in the union to look at opportunities because they're bringing on new ideas. So this way they will say, okay, I'm not going to take a pay cut to get a promotion. Right? So that's I think that's just one example. But in terms of the employee experience and transformation, and transformation does not necessarily mean software. It can just be just process improvements as well.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Q&A. Yes.
First of all, what a great panel. I gotta give it to you.
Thank you.
A statement and a question. Statement is, as Melanie mentioned, the tone at the tops is where things start. And she absolutely has a great CEO who sets the tone. Second is, you did the work around the great silver retirement. My question, and this is one related to that, what do you see as the major differences between those persons who are going to have to replace silver retirement with the next generation? We're committed here to emerging leaders came out, our ability to try to go out and say, what is our emerging leaders need to have for their experience to make these organizations we have to support work? So what did you find in your research was the major difference? And anyone can feel free to chime in.
Okay, so your question is, what are the things? What are the things that will potentially bring in folks to fill those positions for?
It's a different group.
Okay.
When you leave, you got one.
Coming is different.
Ideas, right, Ronnie?
Right.
Very true.
Right.
How do we make sure, and that goes back to culture, what's going to be different with those key characteristics, and how do we make sure that we're flexible?
Yeah, I think one of the differences, the expectations of the people coming in, right? So it's not the typical 9 to 5, or I think public sector might be 7 to 3 or something of that nature, depending on what government entity you're in. But it really is the lifestyle that they're in. One of the insurances that's really prevalent now is pet insurance, right? Believe it or not, it's huge. Mm-hmm. It is huge. There are organizations that are asking for that particular benefit for their employees because they see that as something that is desired. Also listening to the employees, like finding out what their needs are, because it's going to be very different for individuals. I mean, personalization is key. Today we all have cell phones. We could all have the same cell phone, but they look very differently. So I think it's really just recognizing that there's not a standard way of doing things, and there has to be customization and personalization as it relates to, really everything that you do. I mean, whether it's benefits, whether it's, the workspace as well. So I think it's looking at it from that perspective is really going to be critical, and just not saying, okay, this is how we do it, and this is how you have to do it. There has to be a shift in terms of the expectations of the employee coming on board. So.
Thank you.
So I would say there's an acronym that we use in our organization. It's called LOVE, and so these are the things that I think would be very important for the future coming in. LOVE. So L is leadership, and understanding that leadership is not a title. So teaching them how to lead by example and not lead by title. Ownership. Ownership is own the work that you do. Own your path. So own understanding all aspects, and don't get caught up in just learning one specific area. This is my area. Well, you need to understand how your area impacts other areas. Mm-hmm. That's how you can collaborate and cause change. V is visibility. They need visibility. They need to understand the different aspects. What are the opportunities out there? And they'll also get to see what some of the challenges are. And then E is execution. They need to be a master at executing. That's the challenge that sometimes they have, because you can have a lot of ideas. If you don't know how to implement them, that's a problem. So learn how to execute. So I think leadership, ownership, visibility, and execution is what's really key for our emerging leaders.
That's great.
I like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with the panelists here. I think the one word that sums it up for me is being adaptable. Again, I, as a millennial coming into government, it was different. Okay? Coming from private into the public sector, it was different. And I had to learn to navigate that space. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, like succession planning, or dealing with those folks who were the gatekeepers, who wanted to keep their information, I had to find a way to adapt to their style, to the way they did things so that they would open up to me and that they would share information. But then it was also different because, as we talked about earlier again, processes in government sometimes just don't exist. I came from that company to the core is a process. Every single step you take, it's tracked, where the government is not like that. And I found myself spending majority of my time adapting to all of the change that came with the work. Again, now as a senior official, right, like I have to be ready to adapt to change my schedule that was set 3 weeks ago. And, my poor special assistants, bless their heart, sometimes they come in at 8 o'clock in the morning and they're expecting us to have exec meeting, and then for us to meet with the operations team. And I said, nope, we got a press conference. You got to go right now. We need talking points. We need to know what happened at this location. I want to know every 311 request that came in for this location. How fast did we get it close? Like, you have to be ready to have those conversations. And I think that, as Melody said, like, that's the leadership part of it. And it is taking the time to lead through relationships or lead through process improvement. And you can do it in a way that it doesn't shake up the world too much. But I know it can be challenging. And a lot of my friends, they go into their organizations and they're like, I can't stay, I got to go. And they're there for 2 months. And I'm like, okay, now you got to build your little resume, okay? Yeah. You're there for 2 months. But their approach is very, no, if this organization is not going to meet my needs, and again, setting expectations and being very clear. And so, I interviewed my special assistant and I told her, let me tell you straight up, okay? We have a great agency. We're 1,400 employees here. We have billions of dollars that we manage, but it can drive you crazy. And here's why. And I want to give you these examples. And most of the interview questions, and I think that's one place we need to start at really setting expectations, the interview questions were all behavioral. And they were all based on things, not that they would do as a special assistant, but what I did as the chief of staff, what the director does, what the mayor needs. It wasn't that tell me about how you write a memo. I'm not talking about that. But when something has changed at the drop, right? And so, Mayor Bowser, she did Black Lives Matter Plaza. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was great. But my team has to maintain that public space. You're talking about getting special paint. Yeah. We have special materials that have to be maintained. We had contractors that we had to get in place on the fly. Mm-hmm. And so you have to adapt in that space. So I want to say, just for all the millennials and the younger generation, we just can't take over everything that quick. But go in and build those relationships and adapt to where you are. That does not mean be complacent. Right. But take the time, build the relationships, learn your surroundings, and then you move forward.
Gotcha. Thank
and
you.
I want to say one additional thing that really came to mind, respect.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you have a lot of times, millennials, but as people are coming in, the age difference. And so you got to understand, when they hit the workforce, they're not your child. And so a lot of times you want to coddle and you want to, oh, you're too young. Oh, you don't know anything. Baby, you just wait. You still wet behind the ears. But understand, you've got to respect them as an adult. They're there to work. Your kids are at home. They may be the same age as your kids, same age as your grandkids. But you've got to learn how to respect them as an adult. And that also will impact how things move forward.
Yeah,
and I just want to add to that because there are mentoring programs where it's called reverse mentoring, where you have a millennial and you might have a boomer, and so maybe there's the technology challenge that the boomer has and they can help. The millennial can help them, and then you have the boomer that can help the millennial from a leadership standpoint. And then also the last thing I want to say, if we have any millennials here that are putting PowerPoint presentations together, or you have any documents that you're presenting, please make the font bigger.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, man.
We have time for one more question. Oh.
And the question I have is not necessarily from leadership, but I'm wondering if there's any elected officials here, because one of the challenges that I found is an expectation during pandemic for goods and services to maintain as a normal when nothing was normal anymore. And I clearly remember having to stop a meeting. I said, this was after George Floyd. I said, can we stop for a second? And they were like, what's going on? I said, every one of us just watched someone die on TV. Something's happening. And I could see my younger people checking out real quick, like, I don't want to do this. I can't do this right now. Something has just happened. And so I'm curious from an elected official perspective. We know that the constituents have an expectation, but when is it for the elected officials to also say, these are my employees, and right now, none of us are well, and we need to kind of slow down. I found during COVID that I worked more hours at home, offline, online, than I ever did in the office, and they were still like, but can you do this? But can you do this? And we need this. Because we were all also trying to get vaccinated. We were trying to get pods. We were trying to, and so, and we lost people. Because the expectation of the leadership is that we are here to serve our constituents, but what was the cost? So is there any elected officials in here?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, you do.
Not. But, oh, no, go on.
So just being obedient, I'm a commissioner in Kentwood, but I don't have the answers to what you're saying. So I'm just going to be open and honest. I do understand the question. There are a lot of times that I'm finding is that there's the difficulty of balance between public safety and our ability to maintain those good officers in the city when you may have a few bad apples. Right now, there is a police shortage nationwide. There's a shortage so strong that we're fighting between forces to get young individuals to come into it. And the question came, why do we not have more black officers? And the question I ask is, would you work for a force that's been demonized? If you know that the officers, I work with an organization called NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. I work with it for years, and that they're individuals that are great officers. But you find that, again, that mainstream positions it that we're not working with the police officers. So when I go to the schools and I ask young children of color, and we create programs, would you guys want to do this? No, I'm not doing that. So how do we now when we have a mass exodus of individuals retiring, and we're fighting literally between cities and the state pays more money for officers. And as soon as they come out the academy, they snatch them up. And we locally, we're down right now in my city, 7 officers, right? That means I'm working my current officers even more just to maintain. My city population has grown during the pandemic from 52,000 to 54,000, moving to 55. And I'm building houses and developments and everything else for low-income families that they can have what they need. But then those are areas that need more policing. But then so it's a cyclical part that says if I address one thing, I can't address that without knowing the ramifications that come on the other side. And so it's a lot of times you find individuals not quick to speak because they need to know what impact, negatively and positively, it will have.
I'll jump in there really quick. Toney, I know we got to end. A general comment I will say, elected officials, senior government officials need to learn to say no. Mm-hmm. And that question about we need all of these things when the nation is mourning over whatever your political, doesn't matter. You were upset about something in the last 2 years. And yes, the request kept coming. And, one thing I will say about our team is we've been really good at connecting directly with a lot of our elected officials from the government standpoint and being honest and saying, let me put this into perspective for you, okay? You had a team that was 500. At the start of the pandemic, 20% of them quit. Then we got into a place where nobody had child care. People had to take care of parents. Then the employees were dying from COVID. So how do you expect me? And I asked the question, how do you expect me to get these 16,000 service requests completed with less than half of the force that I had? And they're like, well, you know. And then they started to think through it. And if those conversations don't happen, again, as I talked about earlier, we have to just stop jumping. You know, let's talk about the real stuff. You have a budget. You have to act within that budget. You got a certain amount of staff. You need to act with that staff. But you should openly communicate to folks and say, you know, growing up, you ask your mama and daddy for McDonald's. They say, I don't have no McDonald's money. It is what it is, right? Or, you know, we go somewhere, my grandma will split that sandwich in 4. And that's what it is. But let's just be realistic. And you can't say that it's apples to apples. But at the end of the day, that's one thing that we as public administrators, because again, the council and the mayors, they're getting out here and they're selling that big dream. We have to make it happen. And so if we don't go proactively, and and I gotta say, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the city, I have to say our mayor is great because she will listen. She comes to a meeting and she'll say, this is what I want to do. But we say, well, Mayor, this is what happened here. Or this is why this might be a challenge. We always figure it out. But, it is great if you are elected official, listen to folks because they are the ones that are making everything happen for you. When you out there getting to put on your big smile at the press conference, just saying.
Yeah. All right. So thank you to our panelists. We have to wrap up. So you can find a recording of this session at elgl.org or nfbpa.org. We're going to put this up in the coming weeks. But thank you so much for attending this live podcast session. So, yes, y'all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.